What if I told you that one of the most debated and openly hated genres in metal history actually helped reshape how it's recorded and mixed? I'm talking about metalcore. For older metal fans, metalcore felt like the moment when things went off the rails. Too polished, too emotional, too many clean choruses and breakdowns, too many skinny jeans. For hardcore kids, it was the opposite. Too metal, too professional, too far removed from the basement DIY world. But while all the fans were wasting their time fighting about identity, true metal, and haircuts, something else was happening in studios. Metalcore actually became the place where metal production evolved, and it was at an exponential pace. Dense arrangements, low tunings, fast tempos, harmonized guitars stacked on top of breakdowns. Old metal recording approaches just could not handle that kind of density without collapsing into mud, and so producers adapted. By the time my band started touring in 2006, metalcore was already everywhere. Every bill, every festival, every tour. And to be honest, I really didn't love it. But my personal tastes in the matter are completely irrelevant because it's just undeniable that metalcore helped push metal production forward in a big, big way. And whether you like the genre or not, you're still hearing the production decisions that it normalized and has carried forward into almost every heavy record nowadays. For those who don't know me, I'm Eyal Levi, CEO of URM Academy. I've been a producer and a guitarist in my band Doth since 1999, and I've watched genres rise, mutate, stall, and come back wearing a different skin. And I think that metalcore is one of the most misunderstood chapters in the entire story. All right, let's rewind back to the 1990s. Death metal was at a peak, and two European bands, At the Gates and Carcass, released albums that changed the fucking game. Slaughter the Soul, and Heartwork. And then right as that sound was about to explode, both bands were gone. They just broke up. It was disappointing and sad. Only a few years later, metalcore partially filled that vacuum by co-opting some of those melodic death metal isms into hardcore influenced songwriting. That's how bands like Killswitch Engage, As I Lay Dying, and Unearth ended up channeling At the Gates style riffing through a hardcore lens. Or as my good friend said it, I remember at the time being like, oh, I see. Hardcore guys discovered At the Gates. Once those types of riffs showed up, the studio rules started to change. This is where metal production really split off and the idea of a metal specialist was born. In my opinion, and I'm not alone here, the most influential figure in that shift was Andy Sneep. Andy Sneep made metal mixes sound fucking sick. And speaking of sick metal mixes, this video is brought to you by Nail the Mix. If you want to learn how to mix and master metal, Nail the Mix is the place to do it straight from the best. Mixers like Will Putney, Buster Odeholm, Jens Bogren, Nolly, TLA, David Bendeth, and artists such as Gojira, Meshuggah, Periphery, Opeth, Nickelback, and over 100 more. At the start of the month, we released the raw multi-tracks from the session so you can download them straight into your DAW and mix the song from scratch. Getting your hands on this kind of source material is an incredible learning opportunity, just so you can see what the standard really is like at this level. Then, at the end of the month, the mixer does a live stream where they break down exactly how they mixed it on the record and answers your questions live. You can also join our monthly mixing competition. Submit your mix, vote for your favorites, and win prizes like microphones, guitars, plugins, gear, and a lot more cool stuff. And your membership comes packed with extras. All the URM plugins, MixLab with over 150 tutorials, Riff Hard for guitarists, and access to our private community on Discord and Facebook. So if you're serious about leveling up your mixes and learning from the very best, check out nailthemix.com today. It's at the link in the description of this video. And without blowing too much smoke up his ass, I feel comfortable saying that Sneep established the modern workflow and sonic standards that metal still runs on today. Before him, with a few notable exceptions, metal records were basically mixed like loud rock records. Drums were roomy, guitars were big but unfocused, and that approach fell apart fast once tunings got lower and tempos got higher. Moves that we don't even think about nowadays because they're just so ingrained to how we think and work became the norm then. People did not really think of them as standard or mandatory before that. High-pass filtering wasn't optional. Low-pass filtering removed useless top-end fizz. Everything was contained on purpose. And I cannot overstate how influential his work on that first Killswitch record was. There's a long-standing rumor that that record was, I guess, not tracked great, and that the snare that we now associate with Sneep's sound was actually him just fixing problems, but I can't confirm that. I don't know if it's true. Rumors are rumors. But whether it's true or not actually doesn't matter because everybody ended up chasing that sound. His even bigger contribution was how he handled low mids on guitars. Instead of only permanently carving guitars with static EQ, he controlled the low mids with multiband compression. He targeted roughly 150 to 400 hertz, where the flub is, so the body stayed during the melodic parts but clamped down dynamically during chugs. When he posted a screenshot of his C4 settings on the Ultimate Metal forums, everybody, and I mean everybody, tried to copy those. Obviously that didn't work because you can't just copy settings from somebody else on somebody else's mix and expect that to work on your mix. But the point is that people freaked out because he solved a problem that people had been dealing with for years. However, nowadays, multiband compression is just a regular part of everyone's toolkit. And the reason that I thought it was stupid to fight about metal versus metalcore was because they were basically two sides of the same coin. The same things that Sneep was doing with bands like Killswitch, he was doing with bands like Arch Enemy, Opeth, Nevermore, and, all the other sick metal bands he worked with at the time. Let's just do some comparisons here. All right, that was Arch Enemy. Now, check this out. I know they sound like different mixes because they are different mixes, but they don't sound like two different genres. And check this comparison out. Classic. I think you get my point. Obviously, they sound different because they're different bands, but if you were closing your eyes and you didn't know that one of them was Nevermore and the other was Unearthed, would you think that they're the same genre? I would. All right, so I could talk about Sneep for another hour, but we got to move on. I think we covered him well enough for now. Let's talk about the man who laid the groundwork for this entire production style, Colin Richardson. So before metalcore even had a name, Colin Richardson was busy figuring out what modern metal production needed to be. He was the first person who consistently pulled off tight, clear, heavy, fast, and big at the same time. Go back to Heartwork in 1993. That record made it obvious that when done correctly, definition actually makes things feel heavier. And then came Fear Factory. That level of synchronization between guitar and kick drum just didn't really exist before that. That approach is completely normal in heavy music now, but back then it wasn't. So by the time that metalcore bands started to get big boy budgets, Colin Richardson was the guy. Working with him was a total status move. And you can hear how insane his metalcore mix is with bands like Bullet for My Valentine, or As I Lay Dying. And from my personal experience, he is the most perfectionistic producer I have ever been around in my entire life. He mixed the album The Hinderers for my band back in 2006, and I spent weeks with him in London, and he also recorded drums for Trivium's In Waves at my house. So that drum recording has a special place in my mind, not just because it was Colin, but because getting to watch him work was crazy. I remember that he spent 5 full days just hunting for the perfect spot in the room to place the kick drum. I mean, I don't mean like miking it and tuning it and getting the right sound. I mean like where in the room, like this corner, that corner, away from the walls, like 5 days. And people were starting to get kind of impatient. But then once he found the spot and you heard it, it all made sense. It sounded fucking incredible. He talked constantly about 450 hertz on guitars, not as something to avoid, but as something that made the note itself speak. Not fizz, not weight, the note. He was also huge on master fader automation. His balances were never static. He would ride sections constantly so that all the transitions felt right and everything hit the way it was supposed to. Colin figured out how to make extreme music sound precise and clear without neutering it. Andy Sneep came up directly under that influence, took those ideas and pushed them straight into the center of modern metal production. But those ideas didn't fully lock into metalcore until someone inside of the scene introduced them. That person is Adam D. Adam D sits in a very special place in metalcore history because he wasn't approaching the genre as an outsider. He was in the middle of the scene while it was forming. In case you've been living under a rock, Adam D's in Killswitch Engage. And in addition to producing his own band, he also worked with basically all of the pivotal bands in the metalcore scene at exactly the time when it went from a regional thing to an international one. And I mean bands like Unearth, Norma Jean, Shadows Fall, All That Remains, August Burns Red, and the list just goes on. These records were being made by somebody who was living it, touring it, writing it, making it happen. At a point when a lot of heavy records leaned either raw and unfinished sounding or overly murky and vibe driven, these landed somewhere else. You can hear that foundation clearly on Alive or Just Breathing. The riffs are defined, the harmonies are distinct and memorable, the arrangements leave space for all the cool guitar tricks, and the transitions between heavy and melodic vocals feel totally organic. Adam's a great writer and arranger, and he was using that overpowered brain of his on all the bands he was working with. All right, listen to this intro riff from This Darkened Heart by All That Remains. The guitars are tight, heavy, and aggressive, but the melodic content in them is super clear. The drums are super busy, but they're not overdoing it at all. Everything that's there makes perfect sense. There's nothing missing. However, check out how much the arrangement changes once it makes room for vocals. So suddenly there's all this space. The riffs are simple now, but it doesn't feel like any momentum was lost because there's still a busy element, and that's the vocals. But if they just did that for the whole verse, it would get boring. So there's a B section to the verse where things get more intense. What starts happening is that one of the guitars starts playing notes, like it starts playing a melodic riff, while the other holds, and also the vocals start leaving more space. So again, the arrangement is changing, the song's getting more intense, however, there's still room for everything. But then the song picks up steam again by changing the drum beat. Nothing fancy, it's just a slightly different drum beat that lifts the energy a bit. Everything else changes the same, but it allows for the part to keep repeating without it sounding repetitive. Then when the harmony guitars and the double bass kicks in, it's like a real payoff. They actually earned it. But there's more. They managed to step up the intensity yet again by actually doing the same trick that they did about 10-15 seconds ago in the verse, which is changing the drums. The guitars stay the same, but the drums get more energetic and driving. Also, the vocals are higher and more intense, like he's screaming harder. Then just at the right moment of the build, they take it back to the original riff of the song. Total payoff. Before any of you start complaining that I keep stopping it to talk, pause my video, go listen to the original song with no pauses so you can take in everything that I just said and come back here. So all that said, I wasn't actually in the room with them when the song was made, so I don't know how much of a role Adam D played on those arrangements. But I'm going to make a strong, educated guess that he was very involved because it's got his signature all over it. That is what really good producers do. And you can hear it pushed even further with bands like August Burns Red, like on the song Endorphins. The intensity stays high the entire time, but nothing gets buried. The guitars stay articulate, the drums stay forward, and the energy never drops. So what stands out to me is that even though Adam D is a very dominant musical mind, none of these productions sound alike. That's because he knows how to do his thing for the bands without sacrificing their sound, identity, or vision. From a production standpoint, many of the ideas being refined at the same time by producers like Andy Sneep and Colin Richardson show up here as well. tight editing, clear separation, controlled low end, but they're applied in a way that fits the American metalcore scene instead of European thrash or melodic death metal. The result was a body of work that captured what the scene actually sounded like as it was breaking through. And once that sound was established, it spread quickly. Then there's Zeuss. I'm a big fan of Zeuss as a producer because he wasn't changing the way these bands played. He was capturing really tight, aggressive bands without smoothing them out. By the mid to early 2000s, a lot of these bands coming out of the Northeast were already disciplined. They rehearsed hard, they played tight, the energy was there live. You can hear how Zeuss handled that on War by Shadows Fall. It's basically like if thrash, melodic metal, and metalcore all had a baby. The guitars are locked in and aggressive, but the riffs still speak clearly. The vocals stay raw and forceful, but somehow still polished and produced. The drums are driving as hell, but still sound like actual drums. It just sounds like a tight, heavy band is supposed to sound. Then listen to Defeatist by Hatebreed.
Never to be broken, cause you hate yourself, and you hate this war, and you hate the burn, that you hate every moment, cause you...
It's so aggressive sounding. It sounds like a real band, but the vocals are really, really loud. I mean, they're so loud, but they're not drowning any of the music out. Lots of heavy mixes with super loud vocals make a sacrifice on heaviness and aggression, but this has it all. Zeuss showed that you could make records this tight and this clear without killing the energy. That approach translated cleanly as metalcore and metal bands leaned into more complex arrangements, more notes, more speed, more density, but the same priorities still worked. Keep the riffs forward, keep the drums driving, keep the vocals confrontational, let the performance do the talking. A lot of producers who came up after Zeuss absorbed that lesson directly or indirectly. Tight doesn't mean polite. Clear doesn't mean safe. You can make a record competitive without taking the edge off of the band. Time to talk about Machine. Machine is interesting because he came into metal from the outside, and that matters because he wasn't tied to its traditions or expectations. I actually think he didn't even really like metal when he started working on it. Well, he did have his distance from the genre's habits, which made recurring issues stand out quickly. And the biggest one was obvious. Once tempos climbed and arrangements stacked up, metal records stopped holding together. Cymbal bleed smeared transients, drums lost definition, guitars and kicks fought constantly. And the harder a band pushed, the muddier records became. Now, Machine didn't try to solve that problem in the mix. He actually changed how the records themselves were built. And you can hear that clearly with Lamb of God, especially on the Sacrament album. So instead of tracking a full kit and dealing with all the bleed, lots of times he split the performance apart. Kick, snare, and toms would be tracked without cymbals in the room. Cymbals were tracked separately. That gave him clean drum mics where the transients stayed sharp. And aggressive EQ didn't destroy the overhead image because the overheads weren't there yet. That's why his drums sound extremely tight and focused regardless of how fast and crazy the music got. Machine also leaned heavily on sampled and triggered kicks. But it wasn't to correct weak playing. It was to make rapid and complex patterns translate consistently. In dense arrangements, that consistency matters. It lets speed and aggression come through without turning into a blur. However, none of that worked without captivating performance. Machine pushed bands super hard to deliver performances whose energy was on par with the aggression the music was going for. If the performance didn't hit, it didn't make the record. We all know the story of him making Randy Blythe run around the block.
Stick it in your face! Now! Keep it there!
Take hold of my hand!
And that's why those records still feel physical instead of clinical. They're tight, but they still feel like bands playing. And that became hugely influential because Machine directly trained producers like Will Putney and Zach Cervini, who went on to inspire everybody. A conversation about metalcore wouldn't be complete without talking about Jason Suecof. Jason made his name with bands like Trivium, All That Remains, Chimera, Job for a Cowboy, Motionless in White, and the Black Dahlia Murder, among many, many others. Now, what sets Suecof apart is that at his core, he's an elite musician. He can play, he can sing, he's got perfect pitch, and that showed up directly with how he worked with his bands. He was heavily involved in riff writing, vocal production, and harmonies, and his taste was impeccable. He could immediately know when a vocal line fought the riff, when a harmony resolved awkwardly, when a chorus needed a lift, or something just wasn't right. You can hear it clearly here. Dense guitars, lots of synth, aggressive drums, but the vocals stay locked in instead of floating on top of it the entire time. Suecof is also ruthless about song structure. Sometimes that meant making small changes, but other times it meant cutting entire parts of the song out. I saw that directly working with him on a song called The Unbinding Truth by my band. There was this really long intro on that song that I had spent weeks on. It was this instrumental thing that just built and built and built, and it was super intricate, and I was super proud of it, and he just heard it once and cut it. And I was pretty pissed just because I had worked so hard on it. But now if I hear the song, I don't even remember what that intro was. Like I remember the story, but the song is perfect the way it is now. He was right. With bands like the Black Dahlia Murder, his role leaned more towards mixing and vocal production, but the impact was still obvious. The vocals sit exactly where they need to, and they're some of the most iconic vocals in all of extreme metal history. Fast tempos, layered guitars, insane drums, extreme vocals, but it all reads. From a production standpoint, Suecof helped normalize workflows that are still standard. Like reamping, he's a big reamper. Now, to be clear, reamping is not about chasing tones endlessly or not committing. It was about separating the performance from tone decision making so records could be tracked without breaking creative momentum. He also wasn't precious about his tools. There's several times I can remember him pulling up some preset on a plugin and just leaving it because it sounded good. On the Concealer's album, we mic'd a Roland Microcube practice amp because it sounded right. It worked, so it stayed. If I have to sum up Suecof's impact in one word, it would be consistency, and that's why a lot of those records still hold up the way they do. Before I go on, I need to get something off my chest. One thing that's always bothered me about metal culture is how quickly bands get dismissed based on optics instead of substance. The Black Dahlia Murder is a perfect example of this. For several years, they were written off by a certain segment of metal fans as a scene band. Short hair, humor, touring constantly with metalcore acts. They didn't look like what death metal was supposed to look like, so people wouldn't even give them a chance. Musically, the Black Dahlia Murder were melodic death metal through and through. So if you're one of those people who writes bands off based on the way they look, here's something you can do. Close your eyes, listen to the music. Just try it. When I do that with the Black Dahlia Murder, I hear Swedish melodic death metal. And I've said it before, but in many ways, they were carrying forward the Gothenburg sound by the time a lot of those bands had broken up or changed directions. And they weren't watering down the sound at all. They were delivering it to a new audience. Bands like the Black Dahlia Murder act as a bridge. Younger listeners who came up through metalcore tours suddenly found themselves exposed to music that was far closer to At the Gates or Carcass than anything on mainstream radio. And for a lot of people, that was their first real contact with extreme metal. Don't bag on gateway bands. We need them. You can also see that same dynamic play out on the even heavier end of that spectrum. Suicide Silence is a perfect example of this. They got written off constantly because of the deathcore label. For a lot of kids, this is the first time they ever heard anything even approaching the level of intensity of death metal. That's how scenes grow and metal stays alive. Nowadays, a band that's doing that or fulfilling that role is Sleep Token. So even if you don't like them, be happy they exist. All right, let's get back to talking about production. Some of the production trends that came out of early metalcore didn't stick, and that's a good thing because a lot of them were overcorrections. When producers finally gained control over drums through triggering and sample replacement, the pendulum swung hard. Consistency was suddenly possible, and people leaned into it too far. Kind of like that one dude in the band who just bought a Digitech whammy pedal and now has to put it on every single song. One of the biggest casualties of the over-triggering epidemic was the snare drum. For a while, machine gun triggered snares were everywhere. Same sample, same velocity, same transient, every hit identical no matter what the part was doing. In fast sections, it stopped sounding like a drummer and started sounding like a typewriter with anger issues. And the balance, volume-wise, was often way off. Snares got pushed insanely loud in mixes because they finally cut through everything. In isolation, they sounded aggressive, but in context in the mix, they sounded like this really loud sneeze going off in the middle of the track. Metalcore arrangements were dense. Guitars were low-tuned, kick drums were relentless. The snare had to fight those elements for space, and the samples made it easy to just turn it up until it won. But winning the volume fight is not the same thing as sounding good. Another thing that didn't age well is Zero Dynamics drum programming. Every hit at full velocity, no ghost notes, no variation. The groove disappeared, the drums functioned rhythmically, but they stopped breathing. That approach worked short-term because it made records feel aggressive and modern. Long-term, it made them feel flat and fatiguing. And the same thing happened with editing. Early on, ultra-tight grid editing felt revolutionary. Suddenly, everything lined up, everything hit harder. But when everything is locked perfectly all the time, there's no contrast. Fast parts stop feeling fast because there's no human reference point. Another trend that faded was the obsession with ultra-clicky, disconnected kick and snare sounds that didn't relate to the room or the kit at all. I call it drums in space. Early metalcore tended to treat drums as individual sound effects rather than parts of a single instrument. Eventually, people started to, or shall I say, went back to mixing drums as a full kit rather than isolated instruments, just with modern tools. Still controlled, still sample reinforced, but with some sense of cohesion. Sample blending did not go away, it got more nuanced. Editing didn't go away, it got more musical. Loud snares didn't go away, but they started sounding like drums again. In lots of ways, metalcore forced metal production to grow up. You don't have to like metalcore to appreciate its impact. All right, that's it for now. In the comments, tell me, what was your favorite or least favorite moment from the metalcore era? As always, like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.